When we think about the Vietnam War, most people picture jungle battles, student protests, and the fall of Saigon. But hidden beneath the politics and combat was another story, one told in numbers, dollars, and deficits. Because the Vietnam War wasn't just fought on the battlefield, it was fought in the U.S. Treasury, on Wall Street, and eventually in the pockets of ordinary Americans. In many ways, the economics of Vietnam reshaped the modern global financial system. Let's rewind to the early 1960s. The United States had just emerged from the economic boom of the post-war years. Growth was strong, unemployment was low, and the dollar was considered the world's anchor currency under the Bretton Woods system, backed by gold at $35 an ounce. On paper, America could afford another foreign conflict. But the Vietnam War was unlike anything Washington had taken on before. At its peak, the war was costing the U.S. government more than $25 billion per year, the equivalent of over $200 billion today. That money went to everything: military salaries, weapons production, medical care, and the massive logistical network required to move men and supplies halfway around the world. By the late 1960s, U.S. military spending on Vietnam accounted for nearly 10% of the federal budget. So, how did Washington pay for it? Here's where the economics get messy. President Lyndon B. Johnson wanted to fight the war abroad while also waging the war on poverty at home through his Great Society programs. Instead of choosing between guns and butter, he tried to buy both. Taxes didn't rise enough to cover these twin ambitions, so the government turned to borrowing. The result was a classic case of what economists call guns and butter inflation. The government poured money into both military and domestic spending at the same time, overheating the economy. Demand surged, but supply couldn't keep up. Prices began to rise. By the late 1960s, inflation in the U.S. had doubled compared to the early decade. But the Vietnam War's economic consequences stretched far beyond American grocery stores, because under Bretton Woods, foreign governments could exchange U.S. dollars for gold. As the U.S. printed more dollars to fund the war, other countries, especially France, began doubting whether Washington actually had enough gold to back its currency. Gold started flowing out of American reserves at an alarming pace. By 1971, the situation reached a breaking point. President Richard Nixon shocked the world by announcing that the U.S. would no longer convert dollars into gold. This effectively ended the Bretton Woods system and pushed the global economy into the modern era of fiat money, currencies backed not by precious metals, but by trust in governments. In other words, the Vietnam War indirectly killed the gold standard. The war also had ripple effects on trade and industry. Military spending created short-term jobs in defense industries, but it diverted resources away from other sectors. Meanwhile, the war widened America's trade deficit, since the U.S. imported more goods, including oil, to support its war effort and consumer economy. These imbalances set the stage for the economic turmoil of the 1970s. Oil shocks, stagflation, and rising unemployment. For Vietnam itself, the economic toll was devastating. By the time U.S. forces withdrew, the country had been bombed relentlessly, its infrastructure destroyed, and its agricultural output crippled. The war killed millions, displaced millions more, and left scars that took decades to repair. In economic terms, Vietnam lost not just resources, but years of development. Back in the U.S., the Vietnam War also changed how Americans thought about government spending. For the first time, large numbers of citizens questioned whether Washington's promises were sustainable. Rising inflation, growing deficits, and the abandonment of the gold standard all eroded public trust. Many historians argue that Vietnam marked the start of America's long struggle with debt-driven economics. So when we look back at the Vietnam War, it's not just a story of geopolitics and military strategy. It's also a cautionary tale of how economic decisions can shape history. A war meant to stop communism in Southeast Asia ended up transforming the entire global financial order. And while the last helicopter lifted off from Saigon in 1975, The economic consequences of Vietnam still echo through the system we live in today, a world of fiat money, inflation cycles, and fiscal dilemmas born in part from a war half a century ago.